Hello, thank you all for joining us today. We have an exciting series for you this year, whether you are preparing to implement, migrate, or you have already gone live with S4. It is important to know there are major differences between ECC and S4, so you can leverage the full capabilities of your SAP investment. Today, as both Christy and Martin take about 30 minutes to guide you through the differences of S4 versus ECC's new planning features and functions, we encourage you to capture any questions in the questions or chat section during the discussion. We will have time at the end to answer any questions you may have. At this time, I would like to introduce you to both Christy and Martin. Christy, a thought leader with Reveal, brings 20+ years of practical integrated supply chain management experience across a variety of industries, from retail, entertainment, to consumer packaged goods, manufacturing, and automotive accessories. Christy speaks frequently at conferences on a wide variety of topics and enjoys engaging in discussions and problem solving. Martin, managing partner with Reveal, whose passion is to help companies leverage their current SAP investment to optimize their integrated, extended supply chains to achieve a world-class status. His 25+ years experience covers a variety of industries across multiple countries, with specific focuses on driving transformational change within the organization and their core value change. Martin also speaks frequently at conferences around the world on topics around the importance of optimized supply chain. Please, let's welcome Christy and Martin, if you both could take the floor.
Yeah, thank you so much, Kelly. That was a great introduction. Every time I hear my bio, it sounds, I sound a little less impressive to myself. But I do want to thank you guys for making the time to participate with us. Christy and I are pretty excited about this conversation. We're going to try a different style of webinar for this actual series, for the entire series, as you saw the calendar earlier on. And we're going to have much more of a kind of debate, conversation, discussion kind of style through this particular webinar series. So I'd love for those questions to come rolling in. The first topic at hand for this series is just this notion of SAP is rolling out a whole bunch of new planning capabilities, and we wanted to bring it to everybody's attention and specifically start talking about what do they actually mean and how can we potentially adopt them and apply them within our business. So here's our agenda for the day, and as I mentioned, we'll be kind of playing off each other as we go through the series. So I'll start off by just obviously positioning ourselves. We've all gone through the pandemic. We've all come out of that with a pretty clear understanding of how vulnerable our supply chains are. As a matter of fact, I would argue that our supply chains have always been vulnerable. I think there's just been a spotlight that's just been placed on it these last 3 years. But also not only at the micro level, our own specific company supply chain, but also the macro level of supply chains. If you think about how we're struggling to get cars out because of some chips that are down the macro supply chain is struggling to be produced. And I think it happened, one of the things that became very apparent to me at least was this notion that I think companies quickly started realizing the difference between a good supply chain and a great supply chain. And a lot of that came out of the fact that we started just putting a whole bunch of answers in front before the questions were even properly asked. We tried to have a whole bunch of solutions. We were trying to react, incredibly aggressively to deal with all of this. And now we're finding ourselves kind of holding the bag a little bit. The challenge, of course, this was across the entire link of the supply chain, every component of it. You can't say it was just on the sales side or just on the inventory side or just on the warehousing side. It has been throughout the entire execution and planning components of the supply chain. And of course, what that does for us is that it affects our supply chain pretty heavily across the board. And we're all familiar with the bullwhip effect. But if you talk about these notions of these planning capabilities that we're going to touch on today, it's really important to understand not only are we producing or bringing in new capabilities to maybe forecast better, but we're trying to actually create stability within the supply chain end to end. Because when we start seeing deviations on our front end, on our demand, and demand spikes as an example, we're going to start buffering all along the way. And then if the demand suddenly changes, we're going to have now sit with too much inventory as an example. So we're not reacting fast enough, and we're also not using the technology to proactively communicate to us effectively, right? And so what happens is, as we have these demand swings, these up and down, as we're struggling to produce because we have a shortage of materials, we're just finding ourselves constantly buffering. Now, buffering isn't just inventory all along the way. Buffering is also time. Buffering is also extra workloads that we're putting in, all these additional things that we put in to make sure that we mitigate the risk of the business and the supply chain. And so that becomes really key to figure out, how do we try to address these particular buffers so that we can get back to a more optimal state, a more, I guess, efficient state, but most importantly, having an agile supply chain, which is ultimately what we're striving for, because the difference between a good and a great supply chain is its ability to be agile as an organization. So I think with that all said, Christy, I'd love to ask you specifically about a couple of these planning capabilities that SAP is bringing to the table, especially now in the S4 world. Some of them have been introduced a little earlier on in IBP already, but it's important to kind of understand, one, what it is, two, if it's usable, can we use it, and to what extent is it going to bring some of the things we talked about, the agility in the supply chain. How about we start with DDMRP?
Oh, that's a good one to start with. I love it. So demand-driven material requirements planning. So this is introducing exactly what you're talking about around the buffering. So both time, capacity, and material buffering. And the idea here is that we're trying to strategically place these buffers so that we can bend the curve on some of those performance issues, and being able to react and respond to this increasingly VUCA world. So, how can we actually become more agile in being able to react and respond and identify those opportunities? And DDMRP is beautiful in its simplicity in a way. So it allows us to operate based on red, yellow, and green zones. So we're all really familiar with that, right? We have andons out on the floor, we're doing visual management, and this is another way to be able to bring that home. But it becomes entirely driven by the demand. So it starts to get us to a place where we're planning these buffers, and then we are reacting and responding to that rate of pull. So as we get to the top of the red to the top of the green, and ensuring that we're in the right zones. And what's really neat is that there aren't very many software platforms that are certified for DDMRP. SAP is one of them, and they're certified both for S4HANA and also for IBP. And so you get a little bit of a different flow if you have both systems in place, but you can actually execute this whole process end to end now, right from S4. So that's really exciting. And it's all managed through Fiori apps, and they really have embraced the methodology and have brought it into the core. So it makes it easy for the planner to work through those key decisions, and then easy as we move out into execution to make sure that that actual is really aligned with the rate of the pull from the customer. So super, super different way to run things. A lot of familiar pieces to it too, but this is definitely a major change in what it is that we're being offered.
Yeah, DDMRP is often confused with almost like a little bit of a more sophisticated reorder point planning system, right? But I think it goes beyond that. It produces and provides a lot more stability by using actual demand versus necessarily some of it just purely forecasted demand, or even just reacting to some kind of a safety stock measure or trigger. So yeah, I think this is going to be a big game changer for some of the companies where it specifically has the ability to make some changes. It's quite different and unique, and it's something that's very, very different in the SAP space. And actually in S4, if I'm correct, right, Christy, it's basically just an MRP type.
That's how it presents. Everybody always goes, oh, there's this new D1 MRP type. We just turn that on and we're good to go. And that is the way that it becomes eligible for DDMRP. But really the power is in all the Fiori apps that help you to strategically place and right size those buffers, and then to be able to monitor and actually execute in the system. So it automates a lot of that process for you. But it's cool because it gives you a visual interface that's very familiar. Any of us who have run off of, Kanban boards in the past, any of us who are looking at just kind of those red, yellow, greens for exception monitoring, like that's that's the same concept here. So it really helps to drive the actual activities as we're going through ordering to producing to moving materials all along the way.
Right. Okay. Good stuff. So thank you. That's one that's probably more known out there in the marketplace. One that's a little less known and even less familiar for me is predictive MRP or pMRP if you want, right? Talk to us a bit about that one.
So, it's an interesting thing. MRP is so core to everything that we do, right? So getting those proposals for replenishment and having that plan in place. But the one thing about MRP is that it does not consider capacity, right? So in ECC, we could use long-term planning to be able to kind of model and simulate what's going on. But now we actually have a simulation engine in S4 that allows us to predict based on different scenarios that we put in a very user-friendly fashion, our materials and our resource constraints. So you can see down at the picture at the bottom there, it talks about the simulation has been run, what are our capacity issues? What is it going to do to our delivery performance? So not only can we do this, but should we do this? Are we going to get the return for the work that we're doing as we remodel our plans? Do we have any materials that don't have a source available to them? And have we violated any of our constraints? And then what it's actually going to do is it's going to propose you options. Like this is the part that's mind-blowing to me for being in an ERP solution to actually get options. I can store my simulations and then I can resolve those capacity issues or those material issues with proposals. And it will actually come back and I can choose to pre-produce and fill an open window in my schedule, and it will actually go through and analyze and align that for me. It will allow me to choose a different source, or it will allow me to actually modify my capacity on the fly. So if I want to work overtime or insert an additional shift. And then once I've got a plan I like, I can adopt it and we'll actually push through all those additional steps so that I'm in good shape. Like that's amazing to me. The ability to get that level of flow. Of course, there's a lot of master data and other pieces that are required for that, but to be able to have that directly in an execution system for mid-term planning, unbelievable. Really, really cool.
Yeah, I love that you just call that out specifically because, MRP at the execution level is unconstrained, as you said, but we've been trying with APO and IBP to start building that constraint into the heuristic back up at the planning level. But it's always been eluded at the execution level, right? We've never really had it there. And so to be able to have the constraint or predictive kind of modeling in the S4 core is going to be pretty powerful for the planners and schedulers.
Mm-hmm. Makes my little planner heart beat really fast. Like that's exciting and it's a simple interface. So if you're thinking about going to like an IBP solution, considering taking steps into that advanced planning solution arena, like this is a great first step to get your planners familiar with the different simulations. And then you can evaluate your needs from there.
Yep. Okay, this sounds amazing. Okay, so those are two really good supply planning capabilities and really trying to help us figure out how to get our supply more streamlined and predictive. Of course, the better we do that, the better we can actually make a promise to our customers, right? So available to promise becomes a key thing. We know that through the pandemic and even post-pandemic, that's been probably one of the biggest challenges companies have dealt with is trying to be able to allocate to customers and to make a promise and keep a promise without hours and hours of manual work, calling, emailing, spreadsheeting, within the companies. Now, ATP at the core level is pretty one way, pretty straight, it's pretty minimal in terms of its business rules that it has allows the business or the company to actually apply. Obviously with global ATP that's changed, but talk to us a bit about this new one that's available, the advanced ATP or the aATP.
Yeah, so it's interesting. This is a whole new world and yet really familiar at the same time. So there's elements from SAP's history that are here. There's elements of some of the functionality that we would look for out of the ATP solution that was associated with APO. There's elements from the apparel and footwear solution that are in here.
Right.
But the aim of this, and when we started doing the COVID relief calls where our clients and even new clients were calling in and just asking some for advice and help, this is probably the number one thing that we were being asked about is how can we put in rules-based allocations How can we make sure that, we're giving our customers different expectations on lead times? And so this advanced ATP solution that's now available to us starts to give us a lot of those pieces that, maybe were possible, functional, but a little bit clunky or very structured and required a lot of IT interface in previous world. Now, a lot of this is available to us in ways that your sales support or customer service agent could actually go in and interact with it. So not only do we get better rules-based availability checking, we also get backorder processing that's interactive, where we can set rules in place. Probably most exciting for a lot of folks is the alternative-based confirmation. So you can do material substitutions, new product introductions, promotions, phase outs, and then also location substitutions. And then the product allocation, we can do logical segmentation and start to apply some rules and protect our supply so that we always have a certain amount that's in reserve for key customer accounts. And then that last check before everything goes into delivery, so we can go into the release for delivery app now and just make sure that everything's looking the way that we want it to. It's our last chance to go in and make any manual interventions before we release that out to the warehouse to start working through transportation, logistics, booking, and picking. So very, very robust solution. Probably one of the pieces that's been sprinting the most across times, as we've seen new releases come out. So they're constantly working on refining it. But there's some really good trusted and true functionality at its core that has, that's been around for a while, and now they're just working on making it better and better and better and more user-friendly for folks. So the other thing that's really nice is the dashboard. So sadly, we lose the sales order monitor when we go to S4. And so one of the things that can help replace that are a lot of these Fiori apps that help us to kind of make sure that nothing's getting stuck in the process and lets us know where we need to go and manually intervene. And so we get a really nice suite of Fiori apps that go with this too to help us manage through all these processes. It's really cool, really, really cool.
Yeah, I think losing the sales order monitor is going to be a big deal. And I think if we're able to filter with some of these Fiori things, it's going to be amazing, especially if we start bringing in the aATP, right? Because it still is only as good as the data it is that it feeds, right? So speaking of data and speaking of rules, it sounds like there's a lot of rules required here to kind of get these things set up and managed. Sure, I think maybe we should jump into a little bit of a conversation of, what do we do and how do we get there?
Yeah, I think that sounds great. I mean, the next step is, okay, some of the stuff sounds interesting, but how do we know when we're ready? How do we chart a course so that we can get from here to there? And how do we even know where here is? So yeah, let's talk about that and see if we can help people to understand how they can figure out where their organization is sitting right now.
Yeah, let me take a stab at that, because it's, anybody who's followed Reveal for a while has seen a version of this before. This is a business maturity continuum. So basically, how mature are we as an organization to meet our business goals in the use of SAP, right? So how well do we use the system to become a more efficient business? And there's 5 levels of maturity, and obviously you can imagine 4 and 5 is on the top end, and 1 and 2 is on the low end. And what we find is most companies struggle with that, right? Because they're either living in a world where if their system is not working as intended, they're kind of stuck in number 1, right, level of maturity, because that means they've got multiple sources of truth and they don't really have a good sense of the single source of data. If they don't even trust the data that's coming out, they definitely not past the level 2 point, right? Because now we're talking about, I don't trust the transactional data, I don't really understand the outcomes. And if you're using any of these tools that you've just talked about, DDMRP, pMRP, or aATP, if we don't have the data integrity in place, none of those work either, right? If we think of the business rules, which is like level 3 means that the rules in the system actually reflect reality, right? That the lead times, the make to stock strategies, the make to order strategy, all of these rules that we put in place are actually related to what we expect to be doing. And then 4 and 5 obviously is a situation where we're constantly in a continuous improvement state, right? Where we're kind of pushing the envelope around trying to improve, set new targets, trying to improve, set new targets, right? So I guess the question is, to what extent can we, and when do you think we can apply some of these, I guess, these new capabilities based on where companies are on this continuum?
I think you have to be, in 4 really, to be able to start to get value out of this. Because if you think about each of these engines, each of these tools that we talked about, they are so dependent on quality of data. And that's both master data and transactional data. So that's squarely 2 and 3, right? So if we don't have those things and people don't have a good command over how information flows through the system so that they understand what those simulations are doing, or what those recommendations are, and so that they can evaluate them. What ends up happening is they feel like this thing is running, but it's a black box, and they don't really understand what's happening, and then it starts to get not trusted. So it's so important that we've got those building blocks in place, and then we can really start to run. And there's no doubt that those features add a lot of business value, and they tackle some supply chain issues that I think every organization experiences. But we've got to be ready to actually consume that information. So that also making sure that we're doing all these things on a daily basis. Like there's got to be a really strong focus there.
Yeah.
So maybe. Okay.
Yeah. No, I was just going to add to that, because I think one thing you called out there is, and I think it's really important for the audience to settle in on this, is that if you're not ready for these things, you're really just going to accelerate some of the chaos that exists. Unless you get that foundational things in place. So it's really important. Now you can take 1 or 2 of them and start playing with them to get a sense of it. But before you start rolling that out to the organization, you've got to make sure that end to end you have the right data in place, because otherwise you're just going to fail and people are going to throw it out like every other new tool or technique out there. So yeah, I appreciate that.
So maybe what we could do is we could give some people some tips or tricks. Like, how do we actually move forward and and make that progress? Because I bet a lot of the folks who are joining us today were listening to that kind of going, okay, I think we're about here. So let's give them some ideas or options for how they get there.
Okay, good stuff. So let's start with just a pretty simple illustration of our business, right? So if we think of as an integrated supply chain, and when we say supply chain, we're talking end to end, right? Customer to supplier and everything in between, whether it's warehousing, distribution, sales, manufacturing, operations, etc. Right? So this illustration summarizes that. We want to be able to produce a consistent evaluation of information. So for me, the first foundational step that anybody can start doing from Monday already is get your data in check, right? Get the data integrity in place. Start housekeeping if you want, right? It's like if we have 3-year-old sales orders out there, obviously our supply chain is going to react the wrong way. If we have 2-year-old production orders out there, ATP is not going to function the right way. So there's transactional integrity that I think needs to be kind of considered as number 1 in terms of just being able to put the foundation in place.
Yeah. I think once they have kind of that transactional data cooking, they're getting those transactions to be as timely as possible, and the system's an accurate reflection of everything that's out there, then the next piece that we've got to focus on is making sure that the master data is correct. So, how we actually behave as an organization, how our suppliers behave, how our customers behave, are we reflecting that accurately in SAP? So we're informing it, we've got the right rules, because without those correct rules, any of these outputs, beginning with MRP, but then especially as we get into these more advanced pieces, they're all impacted by having that correct reflection of the rules. So you're saying they're going, my supplier's quoted lead time is 21 days, and you're measuring it, and it's 54 every time. You got to have that conversation and work through it, right? Because otherwise we're just planning to fail right from the beginning. So make sure that that's accurate. Same thing with our production related master data, our BOMs and our routings, and making sure that those are accurate to how we're actually performing. So, but the housekeeping comes first, because otherwise all that information, all the analysis that we're getting that would help to inform us is not going to be of good quality either. So
right,
really important.
Yeah, and the thing that people don't realize that SAP is built on a bunch of engines, and these engines are producing results based on whatever inputs we have, the rules you just referenced. And as it's doing that, it's constantly kind of comparing the plan, the schedule, the actual plan, schedule, what I plan to do, what did I schedule I'm going to do, and then what did I actually do. And that's throughout the entire thing. So taking those rules and being able to apply that, which then I would say leads into kind of what I would say tip number 3 would be is ensuring that the organization then has the daily habits to keep both those in check, right? Both 1 and 2, right? We want to keep the transactions in check. We want to make sure our house is always in order. We don't want to have SWAT teams of every 6 months we go and clean up. No, it should be a daily habit, right? It's the same with master data. You know, maybe master doesn't require daily updates, but it's going to require a set frequent cadence to be able to maintain and look at and review, right, to make sure it's optimal. Because that lead time example, you know, maybe it's 54 days through the pandemic, but now that it's kind of out of that a little bit, maybe it's dropped back down to 30 days, right? Let's react, let's change it. Let's not go, well, it was that, so we're going to just keep working our way or expediting or pushing out or whatever it is, right? So I would say the daily cadence, now that's a people thing. That's not a system thing. That's a people thing, right? That's a people, process, leadership, daily discipline, daily habit thing. And so that's important. Now the system plays a large part in terms of how we execute, and it's a good catalyst for that, but that's a people thing for sure. That's going to be the tip number 3.
So you're really saying we can't just get by with the quarterly pizza party where we bring in the pizza on a Saturday and ask people to update their data?
No, and also what I'm saying is you can't put DDMRP in place and step back and think it's going to work.
It'll just go, it's fine. Yeah, no, absolutely, right? All of this requires a lot of daily discipline and actually also continual learning. So those are really important. Yeah, I think the other one for me, it's our job on the supply side of the house is to supply the demand, right? Like that is our purpose in life, and to be able to have a predictable pattern of supply so that we can make and keep that promise. So a lot of it is also that pre-flight checking. So, you know, do we actually have the material, the capacity, the labor available? Do we have a plan that is, you know, reasonable and realistic and actionable? You know, and are we measuring not only the quality of, like, you know, what the floor is doing, but of the quality of the plan that we're putting out for them? We're actually having those active interactions with them. Same thing with our suppliers. Like if our supplier is having trouble, like not only are we holding them accountable and putting that in front of them, but are we also looking for ways for how we could intervene and help? So making sure that we're setting everybody up for success, I guess, every step along the way, and really understand what the constraints and issues are in their supply chain so we can make those good decisions. So, you know, I think about it as like ready, steady, go, go, go. You know, spend that time up front, make sure that you've got a good plan, and then, you know, when you've handed it off, like that baton pass is going to be successful. So important.
Yeah, I like that. And that plays back into the plan, schedule, actual, right? It's just putting in all those checks along the way and then actually measuring. I think that's a key one. I wouldn't, you know, measuring the plan, schedule, actual, right? What's my plan attainment? What's my schedule attainment? That's true for manufacturing. It's true for procurement. It's true for sales. You know, I think so the metrics is definitely one of them. You know, it's one that I would say is probably embedded in all of them, right? You want metrics around housekeeping, you want metrics around master data, you want metrics around your data your daily habits. But I would say tip number 5 for me would be the integration of all of this, right? There's a tendency to think of SAP as this functional things, right? I'm in the procurement, therefore I have these procurement activities that I have to do, and I don't really care about the other things around me. And the integration of SAP is its power, right? But it's also its biggest Achilles heel, right? Is that if we break the integration, the system doesn't perform as expected. And so if we want to put in DDMRP as an example, and we don't consider the end-to-end supply chain, and we don't make sure all those pieces are integrated, then it's also not going to perform as optimally as it needs to, or pMRP, or even, of course, ATP, right? Because ATP is looking down the supply chain and saying, hey, when am I going to be able to get this? I have it, is it going to be made, or how far do I need to go back, right? And so I would say integration is probably almost the single biggest component of those 5, right? Those others are all foundational, but if we don't get the integration rebuilt and reconnected, we're going to constantly live in silos and constantly be a good supply chain and not a great supply chain.
You know, and I think something that's just a hard truth about working in supply chain is, you know, a lot of us, like we're individual superheroes, right? So how do we stop doing that, you know, and formation fly instead? You know, that's a big change for sure, and it's required. Like that's not just a, you know, nice to have aspirational thing. Like this is a real thing. That's what we must do if we want to be successful from here.
Oh, 100%. Can't agree with you more, for sure. Okay, let's do a quick brief wrap up, and then let's open up for some questions if you're up for that.
Yeah, that would be awesome.
Okay, I'm going to tackle a couple of these. Feel free to jump in, Christy, whenever. But I think the first one is, that continuum that we showed everybody earlier. You really need to know where you are on that thing. And now you can obviously print out this and ask a few of your colleagues. But think of it as an organizational maturity measure. There's also on this link, you can see there's a self-assessment. It's a free self-assessment online. It really is quite helpful. It gives you an actual score with some recommendations on what to do next. As I mentioned, tip number 5, the integration of functional flow, I think is probably the key here, because even with all of these new capabilities, it's going to require all of the facets to work well together and play hand in hand together, for sure. Something I think is near and dear to your heart, Christy, so feel free to jump in here, is that it's okay to pick multiple strategies for different materials based on the material flow, right? It's not DDMRP for everything and then period. It could be still regular MRP for this, reorder point for that, and pMRP for that, right?
There's a lot more ands than there are ors, right? Like, it's okay, even top level from what our go-to-market and our manufacturing strategy looks like. Plans for every part, make to stock, make to order, assemble to order, and then how does that flow into all of the subsequent processes? But absolutely, it's not one size fits all.
Right. And I think something near and dear to your heart in particular, a lot of these tools are now providing simulation options, which is obviously amazing. I mean, I think people don't even realize that actual MRP, the old MRP actually has some simulation capabilities too, but all of these actually have them built in as well. And I think that's really key when you're starting to implement or introduce some of them, is to play it out with 1 or 2 materials and see before you start going big bang on any of these.
Absolutely. And how often are we asked to put together a what if? And and we go to Excel or one of our other Click or Tableau tools to try to do that. Like, I love the idea that we could just do that right in our normal workspace. That's
right.
Amazing to me. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, and the last one is a cautionary note, right? Is that if we are ready and we think it's right, go for it, right? Don't just play with it all the time and then not really actually apply it. Let's get the ball rolling, because a lot of these tools actually can make a big difference. We've seen it, you've seen it, I've seen it. Companies that actually start applying some of the older techniques better, and even the newer techniques are seeing huge improvements in inventory, service levels, and even just manufacturing throughput, which technically relates to, can be linked to increased sales and increased profits, right? So I think there's a lot to be had there, and it's definitely worth the effort.
For sure. Revenue enablement as a result of improved supply chain performance is unquestionable. It's undeniable.
Yeah, exactly right. Okay, before we get into questions, Kelly, I know you had a couple of things you wanted to just raise with the audience.
Yeah, so thank you both, Christy and Martin, for sharing your knowledge with us around the new functions and features with S4. A lot of good information here. We just wanted to, before we jump into questions, I just wanted to let you know about our next webinar, which is the Business Guide to S4 versus ECC's Production Finite Schedule. This is going to be on April 12th, and this webinar will bridge the understanding of what to expect when transitioning from ECC to S4 with the production planning and detailed schedule functionality. So I'll go ahead and put the link for that to register in the chat for you. And then if you could switch to the next slide for me, Martin. And then we also would like to personally invite you all to join us for our masterclass, SAP Supply Chain Bootcamp. We're happy to offer you a discount as well with that. If you register, use webinar 15 to receive a 15% discount. These educational training sessions are designed to help you gain a comprehensive understanding of SAP's capabilities and how they can be used to improve supply chain performance. So we cover a lot of variety of topics and provide some hands-on sessions, allowing you to use your own SAP system. So make sure to check that out. I'll also put the link for that in the chat for you as well. So to jump into questions, we do have a couple from the audience, Martin and Christy. So the first question we had here came in right about when you were talking about the pMRP and the aATP. And they're asking how many scenarios can be run parallel? Is there limit of number of scenarios without impacting performance?
So there's a limit in terms of what is manageable for you to set up and run through. So I think about it less as a system constraint, and I think about it more as a consumability constraint, because for any simulation or scenario, you're going to have to go in and actually set up the data to support that. So you're running through a new demand plan to see how that's going to impact your capacity or resources. You're resourcing or moving from one source to another to simulate what it would look like if you lose or gain resources. So I'd say it's more about the consumability of that information and making sure that it's driving you to be able to actually make a decision. And these types of solutions, this is a huge step forward in terms of what is available to us in an ERP solution. But bear in mind, this is not a replacement for an advanced planning solution. So if you're really looking for, the optimization tools that you would see in, say, PPDS, well, that's now sitting with us in S4, or you're thinking about response and supply in IBP, those are going to be more advanced solutions to be able to go in and evaluate many, many different scenarios and simulations. But again, it's all about what's consumable for you.
Right, good.
Thanks, Christy. One more around that is pMRP and DDMRP released within S4, or is it within the IBP product?
They are both released within S4, and then DDMRP is also offered in IBP with a slightly different set of tools. There's more robust functionality in IBP on kind of the upfront strategic buffering pieces, and then you need really S4 in terms of being able to execute to that plan that's laid out through DDMRP optimization in IBP. But pMRP is squarely an S4 tool.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Christy. One more question from the audience. Is there an SAP Advanced ATP for purchased components?
So your aATP for anything that is like trade and sell, you would be able to run aATP for your customer orders or for stock transfer orders and for material availability checking. So for all three of those, for any of the purchase components that you're bringing in, if you're bringing in purchase finished goods as trade goods that you're going to turn around and sell. So yes.
And one last question for today. It looks like, does aATP replace GATP?
Oh my goodness. Well, that is a complete debate. So not exactly is what I would say. So you have some new features and functions that are not part of GATP at all. You've got a new dashboards and visual maintenance. They've made the proving in process or the barrier to getting started is much lower with what we have in terms of user interface and the ability to understand what's happening in S4. And then there are some features in GATP that are not fully replicated. So they are not an exact one-for-one solution. This is a new solution that's crafted based on where supply chains are sitting today and trying to answer some of those needs. There are components of it, and there are also components from the old apparel footwear solution in terms of the engines that are running in the background. So for anyone who has experience with those, that technology has also been pulled over as part of this as well.
Yeah, and maybe to add to that, I think less specific to the question, but more just in general, I think as people are asking questions around, do we use it, when do we use it, what's the right place, I think that self-assessment will be really helpful. And what I would suggest, though, is when you do get your results back, feel free to reach out to any one of Christy or I, and then we can talk you through some of the questions you may have based on some of those results. So please feel free. Kelly, I don't know if you posted that link in the chat.
I did.
But that'll be helpful for folks to do that as well.
So that's all the questions I have for you guys today. it looks like that's it. So, I mean, this webinar, it's going to be available on the website later today for you all. And you can also find any previously recorded webinars. We have other educational content such as white papers, blogs, and some client successes that are always helpful. And then just don't forget, we do have our next webinar coming up April 15th. And also feel free to join us for the masterclass bootcamp. I put that information in the chat for you. And take advantage of that 15% discount with the webinar 15 code. And that's all I have today. So thank you everyone for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks,
Thank
Katie.
you so much,
Thanks,
guys.
Kristen.
That's great.
That was fun. Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
Bye.